Dan's done a good job of framing the issues before us today. And out of this initial gathering, there will come some working groups. One that will need to just crank up immediately. We'll have the formidable task of the safety net housing issues related to the end of COVID funding and the lifting of the eviction moratoriums. And that is if the government ever does any of those things. The moratorium is expected to be lifted at the end of this month. I haven't checked the news this morning, but I would not be surprised if they push that out. The simple truth is we don't know how to forecast what the fallout will be in scope and size. There appears to be a consensus that we will see a sharp increase in the number of households that will lose their housing when the moratoriums are lifted. Under the current eviction protocols, when faced with eviction notices, tenants are required to certify to their landlord under penalties of perjury if they wish to get COVID-funded relief. But even if eligible, an eviction is forestalled. When the eviction moratorium is lifted, back rent will become due. State government, some landlords, local helping agencies have been proactive, reaching out, helping people navigate the resources at the state for getting rental relief. Here in Indiana, the window for that is already closed. They ran out of that pot of money. We don't know whether it's going to be reopened or not. So we will see something like a cliff, a steep slide, maybe a bump. Whatever it looks like, it's imperative that we be prepared. Public, private, and not-for-profit partnerships will be needed to mobilize a response. But before COVID, we had a housing crisis, but it went relatively unnoticed. This past difficult, heartbreaking, and tragic year and a half of COVID is now serving a useful purpose, bringing the lack of affordable housing to the forefront. All of us have been affected by this pandemic, but nowhere is it more evident than among those with incomes less than 50% of our county's average income. And for your information, that 50% of Morgan County's average income, household income, is just $32,168. I want to make sure. Okay, I want to make sure. In the 2015 census report, there were 26,600 households in Morgan County, and you can see the breakout. Roughly a fourth in rental housing, about 3/4 in home ownership housing. That same data identified that among the 6,278 renting households, almost 50% did not have affordable housing. Among the 3,000 or so, just over 3,000 rental households with affordable housing, there were 12 community apartment units offering 642 assisted affordable housing units. Then there was a Section 8 program, and this is a program that goes back and forth and up and down in terms of the numbers in it. I couldn't get the figures for 2015, but today it's 126, so I'll use that. That brought to being 768 government-supported housing units available in the county. Now, few, if any, of the households we'll be talking about today are in that 2,600 or so figure at the bottom, because the housing represented there is market rate housing. But one thing we can be sure, the heaviest concentration of those 3,000 cost-burdened renters were in these lower income categories. So with that said, let's move to see if we can understand what it means when we talk about affordable housing. Now, to start with, okay, technology. You may not think of this as technology in my world. But this is a definition that I favor. But it cannot be used by government. They reduce things to a figure, a number, a percentage. Can't use it. We'll look at just shortly what the government does use. But for households in poverty and for many others, affordable housing can be simply out of the question unless they're in a unit of housing that has some type of federal support behind it. That's just a fact. Research shows that affordable housing has the capacity to do these kinds of things. You've seen this kind of thing before, and it's going to be discussed a little bit earlier, so I won't go into that. You also understand what lack of affordable housing, the consequences of it. And for me, it's those two bottom ones that catch my eye the most. And that is what's happening to our children. That should consider us greatly. But in the policy and governmental areas, affordable housing means something different to policymakers. The Federal Housing and Urban Development Guidelines identify housing as not affordable when front-end housing costs exceed 30% of gross, not spendable, but gross income. So that we have a common understanding what are considered front-end housing expenses, you see these on your overhead for both home ownership and rental. The data I shared just a few moments ago about affordable housing in Morgan County was based on HUD's 30% affordability figure. But where this definition falls considerably short is that what is affordable for housing is often driven by other life circumstances. The proximity of employment is a critical factor. Let me pause here. As we go forward, an important element of our strategies will need to be economic development. Jobs, affordable housing, transportation all go hand in hand. Work locally, about a half mile from home for $14 an hour, or drive 20 miles up the road and 20 miles back each day for $16 an hour. The math doesn't work. The transportation costs erase the increased income. So two families living in the same block, one working 20 miles north, one working here for those figures, but the 30% income classification or the calculation is based not on anything other than gross income, number of people in the home. Now, my purpose in bringing transportation into the discussion is just to illustrate one of the many related household expense factors that come into play when we're talking about affordability. In order to work, many people have to get child care. It's not a housing expense, but it has to be in the equation. Then there's debt. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about increased homelessness this morning, and I am suggesting that we will find that population with capped out credit cards and egregious predatory loan payments. Ensuring that policymakers define housing affordability in a way that allows families to obtain quality housing and comfortably pay other non-discretionary costs is important in helping these families not to just get by, but to thrive. Among whom is the greatest need for affordable housing? We can talk about that in specific terms. But as I mentioned to you before, the largest gap, the biggest problem we have is for our population living with incomes 50% and less of housing, of the median income for the county. I'll just let you look at that for just a couple of moments. In order for housing to be affordable for families at 30, 40, and 50%, they would have to have housing cost less than the figures on the right. How many people think that a family can find housing for less than that in Morgan County, unless it's been subsidized? That's because the average rental unit in Morgan County last year, $837 and growing. In the 2017 Martinsville Comprehensive Plan, and let me pause here to give a shout out. Of the 5 comprehensive plans that are written in Morgan County, each of which has a section on housing, the Martinsville Plan is the lone plan that even mentions the issue of affordable housing. In that plan, it was acknowledged that for every 100 Morgan County rental households with incomes below 30% of area median income, that's essentially people in poverty. There are only 46 government-assisted housing units available. That need could not be more clearly identified, and the most vulnerable population identified. And that brings me to public policy issues. I've already touched on a few issues, but I'd like to share with you some challenges facing affordable housing planners. Before I do, full disclosure is necessary. What I'm going to share with you is information I have shared over the past 2 years with the officials of state government responsible for affordable housing. There has been, as I will note a little bit later, some positive movement on these issues, but my opinion is that it is still woefully inadequate. Historically, the federal government has taken the lead in development of affordable housing for those in under-resourced families. Developers of affordable housing have the opportunity to apply for funds through state government, for loans, grants, and tax credits to build, manage, and/or sell housing units. In a bit, I'll drill down on the largest such program, the one that holds the most promise if refocused. Funds are available for both rental and homeownership housing. Under these programs in Indiana, both rental and homeownership costs must be configured for each household to keep housing costs below 29% of their gross income. But that's not the big story. I said that I would come back to the concept of housing as a wealth development tool. Each month, renters pay rent, mortgage homeowners make mortgage payments. Each mortgage payment adds to the wealth of the family. For those who have their home built with government assistance, the grant funds to build their home also add to their wealth. Unlike the funds directed to rental developments, those funds profit, assist, reimburse, if you would, developers for building the properties. In the home ownership, the funds go into a mortgage reduction, and that money from both the grant and what the homeowner pays in mortgage payments adds to the wealth of that family each and every month. Over a period of a typical starter home for a low-income family built with this support, at the end of 20 years, they have a $130,000 asset, free and clear. That same period of time spent in a rental units, zero. Taking the long approach, having housing that builds wealth increases the probability that that family will escape poverty and will escape even the government-assisted housing. Unfortunately, our state and federal governments have created affordable housing policies that favor keeping families in rental developments. Specifically, I'm speaking of the single largest source of funds administered by the states to create new affordable housing, HUD funds, in the Home Investment Partnership Program. And here's what that looks like in Indiana. That year, there were 2 homeownership projects funded, $40,000 per house. Do you see if you were a developer and you wanted to develop affordable housing, what would you go for? I'm happy to report this past year there was an incremental increase in homeownership funding, $60,000 per house. Now back to 2019-20. I have to keep looking back. I don't trust my thumb. In the same funding sequence that I've just mentioned, IHCDA allocated nearly $9.5 million for the rehabilitation of 293 existing apartments. And that's not really the end of the story. Many of the apartments rehabbed had been previously built with this same source of funds. Not yet the end of the story. 39 of the apartments rehabbed had been previously rehabbed with the same source of funds. So I inquired. Apartments built, then rehabbed, and then rehabbed again. What's going on? Why? I got a very simple and straightforward answer. Because the rents have to be structured to the affordability of the tenants, the property owner doesn't make enough money to perform maintenance and repair. Grants and tax credits, averaging over the 80% of the total cost of building new apartments, and the landlords can't make money to maintain the units. There's something terribly wrong with that picture. So let's sum up this section. Our state policies establish a priority for rental affordable housing that will require ongoing state support for their maintenance. Then, that the housing is affordable for a family is a blessing. But here's the thing. Affordable housing is being treated as an end goal, and it should not be unless we are content with keeping people dependent upon public resources. What I cannot report to you today is the impact on families in affordable housing created by the state, because there is no outcome research. We don't track people. We don't see if we invest in their housing, what that looks like 5, 10, 15 years out. We simply don't even look. So we're making public policy decisions based not on what's the best use of the funds, what's the largest impact we have in spending these funds. It's counting widgets It's all about counting widgets. The report that I showed you a while ago about 293 apartments rehabbed did not add one new housing unit to the housing stock in Indiana. A total of over $16 million was spent that year for 48 new apartments and 2 new homes in terms of new housing stock. Outcomes such as what percentage of people in supported rental and homeownership housing escape poverty, or even the independence from government-supported housing, should be the kinds of goals that we have. Now, homeownership is not for every family. Don't get me wrong. But if we are going to plan responsibly here in Morgan County, we should plan for both rental and homeownership opportunities, and I would suggest to you that as we develop new affordable housing stock, that the advantages of a home ownership should compel us to make every effort to plan developments featuring starter homes that are affordable for under-resourced families. There is no evidence that starter homes in the market rate sector will be affordable for these families of which I'm speaking today. The math just does not work. There are a few affordable housing policy, public policy issues closer to home. If we're going to increase affordable housing stock in our county, it will require public, private, and not-for-profit partnerships carrying out strategies that are spelled out in our public planning documents. I referred earlier to the comprehensive community plans, and I'm telling you that at least 2 of those plans were created before the year 2000. Woefully out of date, woefully inadequate. But there are some repercussions of the public planning documents that we do have that are closer to home, and it's what I'm going to end with. Out of comprehensive community plans come such things as changes in the zoning ordinances. And what I can tell you is that one of the inhibitors to developing affordable housing are some of the changes that have been made in our zoning ordinances that begin to resemble more ordinances that might be set up for a new development in a suburban area. Lot size is increased. Minimum housing size increase. Exterior treatments prescribed. Things that make it more difficult to build any new affordable housing units. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have some challenges before us. I've thrown some darts today, and I understand that. And if one of them hit you, I apologize. Not. We have to face the issues. We have to establish our values that we want to promote for our community. And when those run counter to the values of those that hold the dollars and those that hold the power, we must engage. We must engage with the idea of finding solutions. Thank you very much.